Good night of Shabbos. We continue with the Rambam. The Rambam was quoted in chapter 11 of the Laws of Kings, that who is the Mashiach? Mashiach is someone who is a melech. He's a king from the house of David. Why does he have to say king from the house of David? If he has to be anointed, will there be an anointment by a prophet? There seems to be no evidence that a king will come and will be anointed by a prophet and will be anointed by the Sanhedrin, by the high court. So how could there be a king from the house of David? The answer to that is that a king is someone who feels that there's no one above him other than God himself. That's what makes a king, that he is independent of anyone else. There's no authority in his life, connected with him, that is greater than him, only God. So a king is someone who only fears God. And he is from the house of David. What does it mean he's from the house of David? David had no fear from anything physical. He saw a lion or a bear. The only thing he thought about was, how can he beat them? Obviously, he knew that they could kill him with their teeth and with their claws. But David understood that if he watched carefully, he could know their weaknesses and he could get them to fear. And David was not afraid of them. He just didn't want them hurting him. There's a difference between not wanting to get hurt and being afraid. Afraid means that you give that creature dominance over you. The creature is greater than you, better than you, more powerful than you. And David felt not inferior. He just needed to get his opening. He needed to be able to see where he could work on the weaknesses of a lion or a bear to get them to fear him instead of vice versa. So David, by nature, was not afraid of anything. And David fought the battles of God. That's what Messiah is going to do. He's going to fight the battles of God, and he will be successful. And then he will gather all of Israel and build the Beis Hamikdash. Why am I telling you this? Because I happen to like Joel C. Rosenberg's themes, because I like some of his thoughts about how things will evolve in terms of the end of days. The problem that Joel C. Rosenberg has is that his mother is a Christian fanatic and believes in Jesus Christus, despite the fact that there's no reason to believe in him. Yes, Christianity for a while ruled a lot of the world, but today there's almost no real believers in Christianity. In fact, the original beliefs of Christianity are not what are believed today. The practices of Christianity, the original Christians, are not what are practiced today. Original Christians practiced what you would call Sadducean Judaism, because the original Christians were Sadducees. They were religious Sadducees. They were not happy with the lack of spirituality, but they were Sadducees. They believed in the literal interpretation of the law. And in order to apply the law, when the law was not explicit, you had to have somebody who could explain the law to you based upon that person's learning, the person's intervention with God, meditation, and so on and so forth. So they didn't have an oral tradition. Instead, they would figure it out from the scripture itself. The one who made the decisions was called the teacher of righteousness. And of course, initially, the teacher of righteousness was a priest, a Kohen. Now, this didn't sit well with some of the spiritual-minded people who were their adherents. Why, as a Kohen, could he be a better teacher of righteousness than me? What's his intellectual capacity more than mine? And after a while, John the Toivel, John who went to mikveh every morning, he called him a Baptist, actually went to mikveh, decided to supplant the teacher of righteousness who was a priest, and ultimately Jesus Christus got rid of John also. I know that John was murdered by the Romans, but according to my colleague, my student, Shlomo Sovolovsky, Jesus Christus caused the death of John the Baptist. And the reason for it is Jesus wanted to be the teacher of righteousness, but he was the teacher of righteousness for a form of Judaism, not Christianity. They kept the Sabbath on the seventh day, not on Sunday. They refrained from eating pork, etc., etc. Anything that was written in the scriptures, they believed. They didn't believe in the oral law. They believed the interpretation of the law was given to the teacher of righteousness. And that's what Jesus Christus was. And Jesus Christus could not have been the Messiah, because Jesus Christus never was fearless. He went coward in front of the authorities. He did not tell the authorities that he was the king of the Jews. And on the cross, he's crying out to God, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? I know it says sabachthani in the Latin, but the people who wrote it in Latin were ignorant people. They didn't know the Psalms. The Psalm 22, it says, Keli, Keli, lama azaftani. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? And that's what he's saying this on the cross, which is supposed to be the paradigm of virtue, of self-sacrifice. A short while later, there was Akiva ben Yosef. His flesh was being combed by iron combs, tearing out of his body. And what does he do? He doesn't say, Keli lamav zaftani, why have you forsaken me? He says, Shema Yisrael, there's only one God. Listen, Israel, there's only one God, there's nothing else. Because it says you should love the God with all your heart and with all your soul, even if he takes your soul. Jesus was not that. Jesus was not a person of bravery. Jesus did not fight any wars. On the contrary, as a result of Jesus, Jewish people were dispersed, and the Jewish people were embarrassed and shattered and broken and killed and mutilated because of him. He didn't bring the Jewish people together. He didn't save the people either. And you can say, well, because they rejected him. I'm sorry. It doesn't say anywhere that he's supposed to accept somebody who has no proof for his existence. He was not of the Messiah. He was not of the tribe of Judah. The one that's from the tribe of Judah is Joseph, but not Jesus. He's not Joseph's son. In fact, he was a son of a Roman soldier who raped Miriam, and that's the reason why he was born in a barn, because it was embarrassing. But the Christians refused to go ahead and admit that because they didn't want their Messiah and their Son of God to be considered a mamzer, of an illegitimate birth, which was what he was. That's the reason why he, despite having had a traditional upbringing, he joined the Essenes, because the Essenes separated themselves from women, and it was very hard for him to find a shidduch, to get married, because a person of questionable birth in those days was considered a mamzer. It was considered a bastard. But that's not the halacha. But in those days, there were many who considered a child born from a Gentile, especially a woman who was betrothed, that the child was considered a mamzer. That's not the halacha, but that's the stigma that he had upon himself. So therefore, he joined a group of people who did not marry or shunned marriage or separated themselves from women. He was obviously very bright, and he served as the charismatic leader. But being charismatic does not make you a Messiah. Messiah's got to do certain things. And all the miracles that he did, that wasn't Messiah. He did not destroy the Romans. He did not save Israel. And the Romans didn't believe in him at all. So why should the Jews suffer under the Romans? All of that is nonsense. And what Joel Rosenberg tells you about the prophecies, that, for example, it says in the book of Zechariah, in the Trei Osir, in the book of the 12 prophets, Zechariah chapter 12 talks about after the destruction of Gog and Magog, that they will then start crying about Es Asher Dakara, that one that they have pierced. Now, Dakara means they pierced with a knife or with a sword and killed him. Jesus was crucified. He was pierced on his outer limbs, but he was not killed with that way. He was killed by bleeding to death. If he died, indeed, it could be that he was taken down at night before he died. He passed out, and that's the reason why they saw him afterwards, because they'd taken him off the cross and he survived. According to the Coptics, he went to Egypt, even had a child with Mary Magdalene, supposedly, whatever they believe. That's not the point. The point being that Eis Asher Dakaro, the one that they have pierced, means somebody they killed by piercing. And why would they cry over him if they weren't the ones who killed him? The ones who killed him were the Romans. If you're going to say because they acquiesced to his death, I mean, that's indirect. Why would they cry over something that was done by the Bezdin, that was done by the court? If something is done by the court, it's considered by divine providence. That's the reason why you don't kill Eidim Zomimim, people who are witnesses that are false witnesses. If they went ahead and they caused the death of someone illegally, you don't go ahead and punish them with death afterwards once they've done their deed, because the Ramban says once something is done by the courts following the procedure of the Torah, the sacred procedure of the Torah, they never would have come to that conclusion or done that had this not been ordained by God. And therefore, since this was ordained by God, why would they be in a state of mourning? They didn't cause it, the Romans caused it. And if it was ordained by the courts, why should they be sad? The courts obviously did the best that they could and came to the conclusion according to the Torah. And he didn't die by Dakaro. And it doesn't seem to, there is no connection with the idea of the Mashiach. It doesn't identify the Mashiach. It doesn't say that the one Eis Asher Dakaro, the one that they stabbed, that they will then he will then come back and become the Messiah. It doesn't say that at all. I'll tell you what it means, Joel. They will be saddened over the people that they will have killed in battle. Because you see, the Jewish people are very sensitive. Despite the fact that we've had many wars with the Arabs, we still don't like the prospect of killing people for no reason. And that's the reason why we avoid civilian casualties. Despite the terrible, terrible, evil propaganda of the Arabs, Israel does not attack civilian areas. The only time you attack a civilian area is if there are weapons like a cannon or a missile that are coming out of there. And you know that that's true. It's been recorded thousands of times that they put their missiles in mosques or in hospitals so that they can get a bang out of their buck. If they shoot the missile, then that's good. If the missile battery gets destroyed and they get people killed, oh, then the Jews are bad. Then they get free PR that's negative against the Jews. We don't like that. We don't like killing other people. And so, after the destruction of Gog and Magog, so many people dying, we will be in a state of shock and mourning. Why did it have to come? Why couldn't we have done it some other way? Why did it have to come down to killing all of these people? And therefore, they will cry over the death of so many people like a person cries over the firstborn son, meaning that we will have a sensitivity for mankind. And we will feel the death of one is the death of all of us. And that this will initiate the coming of the Messiah, because Messiah is supposed to create a brotherhood of mankind and bring everybody to God. There is an opinion that the one that was pierced refers to Mashiach ben Yosef, but there's nothing clearly stated about him, and certainly not in that discussion directly. So my interpretation is very clear that they will have remorse over the people that they have killed, and they will be in a state of mourning, even though there were many miracles that saved them. The Jewish people are still sensitive and don't like killing. Also, he misquotes the idea in his books about the virgin having a child. No place does it say, Joel, that the virgin will have a child. It says that the Alma, the young maiden will have a child, and that refers to the young mother of Chizkiah, who was married to Menashe. And you know that that's what it says, and that's what it really means. And you're just pulling the wool over people's eyes. This has got nothing to do with the Messiah, the stories of Gog and Magog. And I want to tell you something else. Rambam says, and he lived almost 900 years ago. He was born in 1135, died in 1204, and his tradition goes all the way back to the temple. His father had a tradition going all the way back to the temple times. His father was a judge, and he was from the house of King David. So he knew the tradition better than we did. And the Rambam says clearly, all of the words of the prophets are cryptic. Even when they seem to be explicit, they're cryptic, and we don't know exactly what they mean till the events will take place. You cannot anticipate something based upon the scripture as it's written and interpret it meaning something, even if you can identify that Meshech refers to Moscow. And by the way, Meshech is Moscow. Joel, you're right. But the source of it happens to be the biographer, the one who talked about the history of the Jewish leaders. Right now his name escapes me. His name was Heilpern, Yechiel Heilpern, who lived in the 17th century. He wrote a book called Seder Hadoros, the Order of the Generations. So it says on Psalm 120, Oyo li kigarti Meshech, woe to me, I lived in Meshech. Meshech zu Moskva. Meshech is Moscow. And one of the czars decided he was going to go ahead and take revenge on this rabbi who dared say that woe to the one who lives in Moscow, that this is Meshech. He decided he was going to disinter the body of the Seder Hadoros and take him to court and mutilate the body. Well, many of the Russian soldiers died in the process of trying to extricate the body, to remove the body from the burial. And in the end, the Tsar saw that this was a holy man, because each soldier who tried to remove his body from the grave died. So instead of taking his body out, the Tsar decided to make a statue of a rabbi in Minsk, the statue of the Baal Seder Hadoros. There are only two rabbis who ever had this honor in Christian Europe. One was the Rabbi Lowy of Prague, who was venerated not just by Jews but even by the Gentiles because of his great philosophy and spiritual teachings. And Rabbi Yechiel Heilpern, the Baal Seder Hadoros, his likeness was commissioned by the Tsar in the 17th century in the city of Minsk. And that's all she wrote for this time. A Messiah has to be somebody brave, not somebody who's fearful, not somebody who's full of himself, as Jesus was. It's not somebody who says, God, why have thou forsaken me at the time of martyrhood. The greatest rabbis, the great rabbis of the Talmud and the Mishnah, never did that. They all said Shema Yisrael, not that they enjoyed dying. Nobody enjoys dying. But they faced death with a lack of fear and an awareness of God. As the previous Rebbe told the Russian who pulled a gun on him, he says, that toy that you have can change the mind of a man who's got one world and many gods. I have two worlds and one God, and that toy doesn't impress me, because the Rebbe was not afraid of death. Yes, the Rebbe did not want to have pain and suffering, but the Rebbe was not afraid of death, and would have said Shema Yisrael, as did Rabbi Akiva. Didn't have to. But Jesus didn't say Shema Yisrael. Jesus says, why have you forsaken me? Which is, by the way, the same thing that Shabtai Tzvi did when he was cornered by the Sultan. In fact, the books seem to indicate that Shabtai Tzvi was a reincarnation of Jesus. Jesus with a J, J-E and S-U-S, Sus. And Shabtai Tzvi had the same modus operandi, the same personality. He was an egomaniac. He was brilliant. When people flocked to him, but he was an egomaniac. And he wanted to be the Messiah. And if he couldn't be the Messiah, he would destroy the Torah. And that's exactly the same personality of Jesus, same personality with Shabtai Tzvi, and their souls received the tikkun somewhere at the end of the 19th century by a Kabbalist who was a student of the Ben Ish Chai. If you want to read more about that, read the story of the Dibuks, the book of the Dibuks written by Gershon Winkler, I believe his name is, but it's a book about the Dibuks, and one of the last Dibuks was the reincarnation of the soul of Jesus and the soul of Shabtai Tzvi. That I want to wish everybody good Shabbos. Joel, you got to change the way you write things.